Coming up on the next edition of the Next Man Up podcast, Press Play Podcast Network, Kenny Rhoda and I talk NFL Draft 2020, specifically Browns in the NFL Draft 2020. Kenny and I will break down all the picks and talk about what that means for the Browns going forward in the AFC North in 2020. Welcome to the latest edition of the Next Man Up podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network, brought to you by producer extraordinaire Chase Smith. I'm Dennis Maniloff, along with co-host Kenny the RoadMan Rhoda, and we are here to talk about the NFL Draft 2020, specifically the Cleveland Browns draft this past week or last week. And so, RoadMan, I will start with that, but first I want to ask you, though, we're on just after you spoke to your son in Brazil via FaceTime. How is he doing?
He's hanging in there. Cameron's, he and his girlfriend are living in Brazil, and they're battling through this like we all are, and Brazil's having a tough time with it, so he's being extra cautious. He's a smart young lad, a graduate from The Ohio State University, so hopefully I've raised him well, and he's smart enough to understand what's going on. I think we all are, with this coronavirus and everything, DMan. And, I continue to work from home on a daily basis now, and other people don't have work to go to. And then you have the nurses and the first responders and the doctors who put their lives on the line each and every day. So we're all trying to battle through this as best we can wherever we're at right now.
Yeah, I've known Cam since he was a pup, and of course he's a chip off the old man's block, so he's a great dude, and he will prevail no matter what he's doing, no matter where he is. So we wish him nothing but the best, but I know he'll come through this COVID situation on the right side of things. Also, as you mentioned, I mean that's the dominant story in the world. Yep. We know that. We recognize we're coming to the listeners as a bit of a diversion. It's the most important thing is the pandemic and how people are dealing with it, and the economic havoc it's wrecked, in addition to the health havoc and the deaths and all that. We get it. That we're never, ever, ever underscoring or understating how important that is. But again, for diversionary purposes, we talk about the draft. It unfolded last week, Thursday through Saturday, yep, on a virtual basis. The NFL did it. And by the way, before we start diving into the picks, a big round of applause here. Hats off to the NFL. I mean,
amen.
Listen, I don't care. The NFL's got its critics. Goodell's got its critics, but I thought they pulled it off. All things considered, they did a phenomenal job of pulling off a virtual draft for the first time in history. And, of course, the ratings through the roof. And as we expected, in the birthplace of football, Ohio comes through strong, from Cleveland down to Cincinnati, of course, through Canton, Columbus, the whole deal. The ratings were beaucoup in Ohio, as we expected.
Well, yeah, when you're picking first and 10th overall, there's interest in the draft for the Bengals standpoint and the Browns standpoint. But even if they were picking later in the draft, there would still be interest. 55 million people tuned in, D-Man, over the 3-day broadcast via television or the internet or however you watched it with the draft-a-thon and everything like that. And you're right. I thought, you know what? I kind of like this better than all the pomp and circumstances that we have year in and year out with this thing, man. Just show me who you got, move on to the next pick, and that thing moved along nicely. As JT and I did an 8-hour show on WHBC on Thursday night, the first night of the draft. So I love the way that it moved along. So I'm not saying this is what I want every year, but maybe they can take some of the positives and the things that went well from this year and incorporate them into future drafts. And of course, next year, the draft is in Cleveland, Ohio.
I was going to say, at the very least, next year have it be in person. And I pray that we've turned the corner on the COVID so we can have a really incredible celebration for the draft in 2021. But all right, so as we review the Browns situation, they were sitting at 10 going into Thursday night. The first round only was Thursday night, and they're sitting at 10. They wind up staying at 10, and they draft Jedrick Wills Jr., the tackle out of Alabama. I say tackle because he was a right tackle for left-handed Tua's blind side, but he will be going to left tackle, as per the Browns' plans as they went out in free agency before the draft and got Jack Conklin to play right tackle. So, RoadMan, when you heard that the Browns had selected Jedrick Wills Jr. as the 10th overall pick in the 2020 draft, what went through your mind?
Well, first of all, D-Man, they had their choice of 3 guys. Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa, who I like the best. Also, Mekhi Becton from Louisville, and Jedrick Wills Jr. So I thought any way they went, it was going to be a good pick because left tackle was their area of biggest need. And I didn't think they were going to try and outthink themselves like they've done in the past. Stay at 10. Address your need, which also happens to be one of the top players probably on your board, and get it done. Again, I like Wirfs coming from Offensive Lineman University, Iowa, with Kirk Ferentz there, but it's hard to knock Jedrick Wills in Alabama, in the SEC, playing for Nick Saban, practicing against Alabama players day in and day out, and he had the important position on that offensive line, protecting the blind side of Tua Tagovailoa. So I can't complain about this pick at all. I was a little concerned about Andrew Berry and Poly Analytics that they may overthink it, but they didn't. They went with what they said was the best player on the board. It was a position of need. So I like the fact that they went out and they got Jedrick Wills, who's 6'4", 312. And they say has great feet, and that's why they feel with Bill Callahan, their offensive line coach, they can move him from right tackle to left tackle, and he should be able to play there.
Yeah, RoadMan, there was a lot of question about, would the Browns move down, just as there was a lot of question about would a lot of teams in the top 10 move down. I was hearing in the run-up to the draft, and I'm sure you were as well, beginning at 3. In other words, after the Bengals with Burrow at 1 and the Redskins with Young at 2, the Lions were open for business if there were any takers. The Giants at 4 were open for business. But what you began to see and what you saw in reality was nobody in the top 10 traded, which led me to believe there simply weren't enough suitors down below that were dying to get up into the top 10 and grab a guy, because I think what this draft was, it was high on volume and quality volume, but I think it was short on transcendent stars. I mean, we shall see, but it just felt like there weren't that many absolute 5-star super studs. And as a result, those teams who did want to move down weren't able to find a suitor. So you get down to the Browns at 10, and I'm going on my gut. I'm going on simply what I think. I don't have any sourcing on this, and we'll probably never know publicly. But my guess is the Browns had the tackles ranked, as every team does, but they had a cutoff. Okay, they were going to allow either 1 to go off, or 2 to go off, or 3 to go off, and then they were going to eject if that happened, okay? And they were going to try to trade down if that scenario happened. So if it was 1, then that, to me, is Jedrick Wills, that he was their top guy, and if they didn't get Wills, they were going to look to move. I don't think that's what I don't think that 1 was the scenario for me. What I saw was 2. Okay, I think the Browns had identified Andrew Thomas and Jedrick Wills as their choices, and then after that, they saw a fall-off. And if they didn't get one of those 2 guys, they were going to look to move down. Not too far, of course, because they wanted to come out of the draft with a tackle. But when Wills was still on the board, and the reason I believe this is because the pick was in as soon as the Jaguars picked at 9, I believe it was C.J. Henderson, the corner. the Browns pick was in. So there was no hesitation from Cleveland, which led me to believe they had Wills as identified. Like he's ours if he's there, but I'm not sure that they would have settled for their third-ranked or fourth-ranked tackle.
It's a great point. Let me interrupt real quick, D-Man. Here's why. In listening to Jedrick Wills' conference call after he was drafted by the Browns, he mentioned that he had talked with Joe Thomas before the draft as well as after the draft, I believe. And he mentioned in his before the draft conversation with Joe Thomas that Joe mentioned something about how the Browns and Andrew Berry liked him, right? So it was kind of a tipping of their hand almost after the fact, but still from Jedrick Wills that there was a lot of interest in him and that he may have been their number one tackle or their number two. Like you said, I had them in my mock draft going with Thomas from Georgia, and then I had Wirfs, and then I had Wills. But the Browns, it sounds like, or it looks like, we may never know, like you said, it was Wills Thomas or Thomas Wills.
Yeah, and it's really good news to me that Joe Thomas appears to be involved, not just appears, but was involved in this process. To what degree, we're not sure, but clearly the Browns brass was willing to listen to him, willing to have him engage. You're hearing post-draft from Wills that he's going to get pointers from Joe Thomas. You know, I had said on this podcast, in addition to my radio show on WTAM, that I thought one of the things the Browns should do is solicit an evaluation from Joe Thomas on the top tackles in the draft and have Thomas turn in his preference sheet. And if that in fact happened, it's pretty clear that Thomas had Wills identified at either 1 or 1A on his tackles list. So if he's good enough for Joe Thomas, he's good enough for me. There are, of course, plenty of other reasons I like the pick. He's nasty. I love nastiness. I think the Browns have been short on nastiness for too long over the years. Not to say any NFL player is soft, but you know what I mean. I mean, guys who have a mean streak, I don't think you can really coach a mean streak. I think you have to have that innate competitive fire that runs so hot that you can be nasty. And when Kevin Stefanski comes out and within the first, 10 to 15 sentences describing Wills, he's talking about his nastiness, that brings a smile to my face. Of course, the fact that he comes from Alabama, the fact that he was coached under Nick Saban, he's got the fundamentals down. You know that if Wills was a slacker, he wouldn't have been playing, or he would have been benched and his stock would have gone down. So if you're going to play and excel for Nick Saban, odds are pretty good you're going to be able to do it at the NFL level. Granted, we are the Browns are the organization that drafted Trent Richardson. But to me, that's an exception more than the rule. I'm comfortable with a top flight prospect coming from Nick Saban's Alabama Crimson Tide. And so for a lot of reasons, I like the pick. And as we mentioned, as we alluded to, the Browns, who have, arguably, well, they would say not arguably, the smartest trio in terms of Berry, Depot, and Stefanski, 3 Ivy Leaguers. They didn't try to get cute. They didn't try to go full brainiac and say, you know what, we're going to outsmart all you all with a dastardly trade out of the 10 hole. Not to say again that it couldn't have happened if I had my fingers crossed at 9. Once Isaiah Simmons went 8 to the Cardinals. By the way, that's a classic example of you can't tell me the Cardinals went into that draft thinking that they were going to draft Isaiah Simmons. But when he was on the board at 8, they're like, we're in, we got him. Boom. There was no hesitation from the Cardinals. They saw him and they took him. But I was keeping my fingers crossed. Once Simmons was off the board, I'm like, I really want to see Jedrick Wills or at least Wirfs. But certainly Wills was my preference after Thomas, in part because Louis Riddick said, a guy I love Louis Riddick. He said flat out Jedrick Wills and everybody else in that tackle class. So if I believe Riddick like I do, I was all in on Wills. But at 9, I'm thinking, man, Jaguars, please don't mess this up. And they take C.J. Henderson. Okay, fine. He's a nice corner. Good. I hope he has a great career. But that opened the door for the Browns to take Wills, and they, of course, had to pick in about 3.5 seconds after the Jaguars had made theirs official. So I was excited for Cleveland, and I think Wills will be. And I'll ask you, RoadMan, do you believe that Wills will be able to make the transition to left tackle?
Protected the blind side of Tua Tagovailoa. Did a great job in Alabama. He's got good feet. He's got good feet. And we missed. And by the way, Todd McShay. Let's hope he gets better. He's got the coronavirus. We missed him in the draft coverage this year. So Mel was just there, basically by himself, talking to himself. I don't think Mel cared because he just loves to hear himself. But Tua Tagovailoa, blindside protected. Jedrick Wills. He's got good feet. So I think he'll be able to make the transition over to the left side. And if you're Baker Mayfield, there are no excuses left, D-Man. None whatsoever, okay? You got bookends now. You got Conklin on the right side. You got Wills on the left side. You got Petonio and Treader up the middle. So maybe the one guard spot is the weak link on the offense. Other than that, your wide receivers are studs. Your running backs are studs. You got a fullback now. Your tight end's a stud. They drafted another tight end. They picked up the option for Njoku for his 5th year and everything. There are no excuses whatsoever now for Baker Mayfield. This is a year where he must produce like he did his rookie year as compared to last year. And I know it's a new head coach, and people say, well, that's still, that's right. No, I don't want to hear any excuses. It's all there for him to succeed. He's got to now go out and get it done with his left tackle in Wills, his right tackle in Conklin, and all those weapons at his disposal.
I agree with you, and I also think it's good to know that in a pinch, and it's obviously not what they want, but in a pinch, if Wills somehow is drowning at left tackle and says all I can do is right tackle, I believe Jack Conklin will willingly do that. He will move over to left tackle where his roots are.
They'll have to pay him more, D-Man.
Yeah,
left tackles get paid more. They have to give him a bump in pay.
It's not what you want, of course. They're drafting Wills to be their left tackle. I'm saying in an emergency, Conklin, I think, could swing over there without much difficulty. I did find it interesting before we move on to day 2.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, RoadMan, did I hear this right? That our buddy Chris Hubbard, declined to give up the number 74 to Wills, and Wills wound up taking 71. Thomas offered him 73. Think about that. Hubbard said, no, I want 74. And Thomas said, you can have 73. Now, maybe there's something near and dear to Hubbard's heart with 74. I haven't checked that out.
Right.
But apparently Hubbard's holding on to 74, and Wills is going to become 71. Did you hear otherwise?
I have not heard much on that, D-Man, but that number 74 that Hubbard will be wearing will be nice and clean as he stands on the sidelines this year.
Oh, dear. All right, second round. We have 3 picks by the Cleveland Browns, number 44 overall after a trade down from 41 to 44. Safety Grant Delpit of LSU, and then a pair of third-rounders within 10 picks of each other. Defensive tackle Jordan Elliott of Missouri with the 88th overall selection, and then Jacob Phillips, linebacker out of LSU with the 97th overall selection. RoadMan, when you look at those 3, I realize the focus needs to be on Grant Delpit because he is your only second rounder. But what do you think about those 3 guys as your day 2 picks for the Cleveland Browns?
Got a pair LSU Tigers. Go Tigers. Ed Orgeron. You got to love my guys. They're going to play hard. They're going to play good for everybody there in Cleveland. Got to love Delpit and Phillips. Go Tigers.
I love the second round pick, D-Man. They got first round talent in the second round. And I know he had some tackling issues this past season maybe, and it wasn't up to, his standard in that. But to get Grant Delpit, a free safety, 6'2", 213, 4'5", 40-yard dash in the second round, that's a starter. Not next year. I think he could probably start this year if there is a this year. Let's hope there is. So I think they got 2 starters in Wills and Delpit. Elliott's going to be a rotation guy with that defensive line. And Jacob Phillips is the wild card from LSU. That's the one spot I still think is the weakness on this team. They really didn't address it in a big way. Linebacker, to me, is the weakest part of this entire Browns football team. I thought maybe in the second round they'd go for the best linebacker. Bond was available from Wisconsin. They passed on him a couple of times. Also, when it came down to that pick at 97 in the third round, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you know what? This would be a great place to take Malik Harrison from The Ohio State University. And the Browns elected to go with Phillips, and then the very next pick, the Baltimore Ravens swoop in and take Malik Harrison. So that'll be something I'll be watching, their careers, how they unfold, picked one spot away from each other. But there was a theme to this, D-Man. Did you notice the theme in the first four picks? Alabama, LSU, Missouri, and LSU. SEC, SEC. First four picks, all from the SEC. 40 picks went from the SEC in this draft. Best conference in the country still. And so I don't think that was a coincidence. So I think they did very well with their first four picks.
Yeah, I mean, Delpit is a fascinating name. We heard so much about him during the 2018 season when, I think he burst onto the scene and became a household name for those who love college football. And then 2019 wasn't quite up to his standard and certainly not up to the 18 standard that he set. But we find out that he was dealing with, or we knew that he was dealing with a high ankle situation. And, you remember back to when Myles Garrett was dealing with that at Texas A&M in his final year.
Yep.
And he talked, he had mentioned without making an excuse about how it wasn't easy to get through that. And, you try playing safety at the high level of college at the premier conference, arguably, but I say arguably, I mean, as much as I love the Big Ten, the SEC, premier conference in the country, you're playing high level football. And by the way, you're playing on a national championship team that goes undefeated. And you're trying to do it with an ankle injury. I can't imagine how difficult it was, but you never heard excuses from Delpit. I went back and looked at the, any and all clips I could find once he was drafted. And you never heard him say anything about, I'm injured or whatever. He just played and did the best that he could. And so you get, in my mind, you get points for that. After the first round was over, after the 32nd overall pick had been made, I was driving home from the draft show that I had done with Mike Snyder. Of course, Mike Snyder very well.
Yep.
Hall of Famer Snites and I were, and Munch Bishop, we were doing the show on TAM. And my buddy called, who's a draft expert, Artie, and he said the reason he's a draft expert is because he's got uncanny ability to pick guys, especially offensive linemen who excel at the NFL level. He said to me on the way home, he says, I can't believe Grant Delpit is still on the board. And I was like, yeah, I hadn't really thought of it because I was sifting through all the picks that were made during the first round. But he's like, if Delpit is there, the Browns absolutely positively should take him because he is undervalued, or he would be undervalued at 41. Well, they moved back to 44, and I'm thinking, all right, please tell me that Delpit's not going to go at 41, 42, or 43 because that would, ruin the plan. But when he was available, it didn't surprise me at all. I told my wife in the family room, I said, it's either going to be Delpit or I had another guy identified. I can't remember who, and it wound up being Delpit. So good for the Browns there, or so it would seem. We recognize every team thinks that it got an A in the draft. Every team thinks it got a steal. We recognize that. Yes, that is a condition, a caveat of this entire analysis that we're doing. So the Browns, of course, think they got a guy in Delpit, whereas you look at any team, they'll say, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? Regarding Elliott and Phillips, I wonder if Elliott's a little bit undervalued just because, he came from a under the radar SEC school, if you will, in Missouri. I know he was a PFF darling. Pro Football Focus loved him as a pass rusher. And you know that these guys, this front office and coaching staff in Cleveland really does pay attention to PFF. So it didn't surprise me when you saw what Jordan Elliott's PFF grade was, that they would take somebody like that. And as you said with Jacob Phillips, I have no idea. You know, I hope that he works out.
Right.
But who knows? I mean, anytime you get past the second round or you get close to 100 picks overall, it almost becomes a crapshoot. But, you know, I hope for his sake and for the Browns' sake that it works out. We go to day 3, RoadMan, 3 more picks for the Cleveland Browns. 4th round, 115th overall, Harrison Bryant out of FAU, the tight end. 5th round, 160 overall, center Nick Harris from the University of Washington. And 6th round, 187th overall, wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones out of that team up north. Your thoughts about Browns 2020 draft day 3?
I want to say one more thing about the 2 Tigers.
One team, one heartbeat. Go Tigers.
All right, now that we got that out of the way, national champs. Looking at day 3, Harrison. I remembered him from playing against Ohio State first game of the season last year, D-Man. You remember that game?
Yeah, Lane
Fort
Kiffin.
Atlanta came in. Yeah, Lane Kiffin came in, and unfortunately, all I remember, and I know he had 6 grabs for like 70 yards in that game. He also had 2 or 3 drops in that game when the game was on the line. And then I looked the next week, they played another ranked team the next week, and he did okay. But then after that is when he was in Conference USA, and he put up all the numbers that helped him win the Mackey Award. Now, don't get me wrong. I only saw him play one time. But for me, Khalil Mack, I only saw him play one time that year, and he destroyed Ohio State, right? J.J. Watt that year with Wisconsin. I only saw him play one time. He destroyed Ohio State. Now, yeah, I'm a Buckeye honk. I'm a homer and all that. But if you play well against the Buckeyes, then you're going to stand out on my radar screen. He did not play well against the Buckeyes in a big setting on the big stage and everything like that. And then the next week, like I said, against a ranked team, I forget who it was, they got crushed again, and he didn't play well. But then he played well the rest of the season. So it's unfair for me to judge Bryant Harrison just on the Ohio State game, but that's what's in my head. We'll see. It's a 4th-round pick. They think they got great value. They got the Mackey Award winners, the top tight end supposedly in college football in the 4th round. Okay, that you know what? Don't have a problem taking a chance on a guy that won that award. Nick Harris, the center out of Washington, one of the big uglies in the middle. Treader's getting up there, right? And he's played with injuries the last few seasons. So I like a depth pick there. And then the interesting one is Donovan Peoples-Jones. D-Man, I remember when he came out of high school, dude. 5-star stud. Ended up going to Michigan. Oh, geez, Ohio State's going to have to deal with this kid for 4 years. Well, no, they're going to have to deal with him for 3 years because he's going to be a 1st-round pick after 3 years and lighten it up in Ann Arbor. You talk about underachiever. It's Donovan Peoples. You look that up in the dictionary. It's Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's the definition of underachiever, and his picture's there because he did not have the career he was expected to have at Michigan. Now, was that because of Harbaugh? Was that because of the horrific quarterbacks they've had? Was it because he was injured? Or was he just maybe not as good? Don't know, but he underachieved. He passes the eye test, 6'1", 212, 4'4", 40, right? He's got a 42-inch vertical, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. But again, I'll say this. In the 6th round, somebody with that potential talent, why not roll the dice on it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I get it. I totally understand that. And regardless of where he played, where he came from, you look at that, it's a 6th-round pick. If we hit, we're geniuses. If we don't, it's no big deal. It's a 6th-round pick. It was pick, 187 overall. No big deal. So I didn't have a problem with it.
So much to unpack, if you will, with the DPJ pick, which I find to be the most fascinating pick of all. The Wills pick to me was almost chalk. Delpit made a lot of sense because they needed the safety, but the Peoples-Jones pick, for the reasons you articulated, is a fascinating pick. And first of all, to any of you out there, if a player gets drafted in the oh, I don't know, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. They're going to have flaws. All right. I mean, it's like you say something like, well, maybe if Donovan Peoples-Jones could surprise people. Oh, don't you realize he's got bad hands, or he can't run routes, or he's an underachiever. He wouldn't have been drafted where he was if he was some unbelievable superstar lock that everybody thought was going to be great. So don't come at me with don't you realize this guy's got flaws? Of course he's got flaws. But there's no getting around what you said, RoadMan. He was a 5-star stud muffin coming out of, was it Cass Tech, I believe, in Michigan. I listened to a video clip of Herb talking about how he and Combs went into the Peoples-Jones house and they were convinced they had him when they left the residence, and he wound up going to Michigan. But all Herb could say was really good things, really kind things about Donovan Peoples-Jones. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Browns dialed up Herb and asked him, what did he think as somebody who recruited Peoples-Jones and then had to defend against him. And Herb undoubtedly said positive things, but he has the physical tools. I tweeted out that make sure you remember that this is a guy who was hampered often by suspect to bad quarterback play and antiquated play calling. And that's when, of course, some of the blowback, oh yeah, but he has no hands, or he drops too many balls, or he doesn't run routes. Still, he didn't play at quarterback U. He played for a coach who's, it seems to me like his offensive system is stuck in the 1980s or 1970s. So maybe, just maybe, a new lease on life, becoming a professional as opposed to a college player, and then, having a legitimate quarterback. Maybe, just maybe, Donovan Peoples-Jones will begin to show what many thought, he was going to be when he went to Michigan. I'll say this, though. You got Jarvis Landry coming off of a hip surgery. Yep. You've got Odell, who knows what Odell's up to on a day-to-day basis, but he's also coming off a core surgery.
Right.
There's opportunity at wide receiver on the Cleveland Browns. I mean, even if Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. are 100% healthy if and when the season starts, or if and when training camp starts, the third receiver to me is wide open. So
absolutely,
here's a situation where you're Donovan Peoples-Jones. It's not like, you're Jordan Love and you get drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the first round and you go, why? Why did I have to get drafted by the Packers to sit and rot behind Aaron Rodgers when 3 picks earlier, Belichick could have taken me and I could have competed with Stidham and Hoyer for the starting quarterback job. But Belichick punted on the 23rd pick, and it Love wound up going to the Packers. But it's a situation where Peoples-Jones is like, you know what? As a 6th rounder, I can't ask for much more than this. I mean, I'm in the Midwest. I'm familiar, I would assume, with the Browns to some extent. I have the physical tools. And the third receiver spot on this team is wide open. And who knows, if I'm really, really good, maybe I can sub in, if Beckham or Landry gets hurt. So I don't want to say the sky's the limit for a 6th-round pick, but there's an opening there. It's not like he sits there and he looks at the depth chart and he says, oh my gosh, I'm stuck behind 5 all-world wide receivers. I'll have no shot of making this team.
I just hope he doesn't turn out to be another Justin Gilbert with all the talent in the world, but it just doesn't pan out at the NFL level. But here's the difference. Justin Gilbert was taken in the 1st round. This was a 6th-round pick. So this, you know what? And I know there are people out there, and I'm a Buckeye guy, like I said, that say they should have taken KJ Hill over Donovan Peoples-Jones. Well, the difference there between the two, Hill had the better college career, but 6'1.5", 212, 4.48, I shorted him 2 inches, 44.5-inch vertical jump. His hands are 10 1/8. So he's got all the measurables, right? You know, the old looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane, unfortunately. Well, hopefully that's not the case here. Hopefully he finally lives up to his potential. And KJ Hill ended up going to the Chargers in the 7th round. They got a nice possession slot receiver there. Peoples-Jones has always had the potential to be a number 1 guy. It never happened at Michigan. Don't know if it'll happen in the NFL, but it'll be interesting to see, how he pans out with the Browns and Kevin Stefanski's offense.
Yeah, and getting back to the Michigan part of it, I've never been – maybe I said this when Braylon Edwards was drafted and there was a talk about, how can a Michigan man be accepted in Northeast Ohio with the Browns? I never got – but I don't think I said anything. I just don't understand that whole deal. Yeah. I don't like the University of Michigan. I made that clear on my Twitter feed, and I've gotten blowback for it. Don't really care. Except when it gets vicious, which it did when I had the audacity to criticize Jim Harbaugh once, and I got called all kinds of names and expletives and all that. Okay, fine. But what I've never understood is why does that have to bother me that a Michigan player is playing for my professional football team? It's one thing for if you're going to tell me, I want you to root for Donovan Peoples-Jones as a Michigan Wolverine when he plays the Buckeyes. Of course not. Or even when the Michigan plays Michigan State. No, not going to do that either because I can't stand Michigan. But once they graduate to the professional level, of course I'd like to see Buckeyes drafted. I'd like to see Buckeyes on the Browns, which is my team, my preferred team. But I don't care where you come from once you get to the professional level, as long as you can play. It's not going to matter to me one bit that Donovan Peoples-Jones is a Michigan man as long as he makes plays. Jabril Peppers, when he had that sack in Denver 2 years ago, you think I gave a crap that he came from Michigan when he made the play of the game to help the Browns beat the Broncos in Baker's rookie year? No. So that whole notion, you're going to have an adjustment here, Donovan, now that you're a Michigan guy coming to Cleveland? Hell with that. Stop that crap. Let the guy come in here. He's playing with house money. I mean, it's easy for us to say. It's his career.
Right.
We're saying you've got nothing to lose. He's saying, well, you know what? I do have a lot to lose. If I don't make this team, then what am I going to do? He's, by all accounts, a very smart guy, though, so he could probably find a second career rather quickly. But the point is, he can come in. He doesn't have to be worried about being the number 1 or even the number 2. He's got an opening at a 3 receiver. He's got a really nice offense that he's looking at with a quarterback who can sling it and a competent coaching staff. So I'm excited for Peoples-Jones' opportunity.
And DMan, he can be a special teams guy too his first year. He can be a punt returner and a gunner and make his name that way while maybe working his way in with reps, on the offense. Would I have liked to have seen the Browns maybe pick up a 7th and go get KJ Hill? Yes. For a possession receiver, I like KJ Hill. I think the Chargers got a steal in the 7th round for him. He was an overachiever maybe at Ohio State, where Peoples-Jones was an underachiever. At Michigan, I think both can play in the National Football League. And again, like Malik Harrison versus Jacob Phillips, I'll be watching KJ Hill versus Donovan Peoples-Jones in their careers throughout the NFL and see who pans out.
And RoadMan, as we look at the draft, of course, we don't look at it in a vacuum. I think we need to couple it with the Browns' offseason, which includes trades and free agent acquisitions. And I speak of that because Colin Cowherd, the nationally known radio personality who knows football, he's a very smart guy when it comes to the NFL. He had his grades, and he doesn't do grades off the day of draft. Neither do I. But he talked about teams that he thought did an exceptional job in the off season. He graded the off season based on the either trade or free agent acquisitions, knowing what their resumes were in the NFL. And then he took the top couple of picks and said what their projections are. And he combined that. And he said, all right, I'm going to give letter grades to off seasons.
Okay.
And I believe one of the 4 offseason A's that he gave was to the Cleveland Browns because he said they got Conklin and they got Austin Hooper.
Right.
So they took care of right tackle and tight end. And then they augmented that with, Wills and Delpit and Elliott and Phillips. He had put those down as the top 4 draft picks. He didn't even include Peoples-Jones or the potential backup center, or whatnot. So your thoughts about the Cleveland Browns offseason as a whole? Do you agree with Colin Cowherd that the Browns had have had, because it's not over yet, they have cap space and Clowney's still out there, do you agree the Browns have had an A-worthy offseason?
I came away impressed after being scared when they turned over the front office to a then 32-year-old, now 33-year-old first-time general manager in Andrew Berry, because he was around for 2 of the worst years in Cleveland Browns football history. And that scared me. But after what they've done this offseason, being aggressive from the get-go, proactive from the get-go, going out and getting Conklin. Hooper was a little bit of a surprise to me, but that's because of the offense Stefanski likes to run. So they're married, the GM and the coach, it seems like. They're on the same page. So everything they've done, with one exception, D-Man, I'm okay with. I just picked up my R-Lads guide, and shout out to Dan Schonk and the staff at R-Lads. Phenomenal job once again this year. And Willie Harvey, Sione Taki, Mac Wilson, Trevon Young, BJ Goodson, Jermaine Grace, Tay Davis. Those are the linebackers on this team right now. That's the weakest part of this football team. It was not addressed, with the exception of the 3rd-round pick of Phillips out of LSU. Go Tigers. Until they really address that, I'll give them an A- B+, Steve. I can't give them a solid A because linebacker's been a weak spot. It is still a weak spot, but I thought they did a very good job everywhere else.
Yeah, the good news, and there was a lot of it, you didn't hear much from Haslam, other than when the respective men were hired, Berry and Stefanski.
Right.
It's always good when the Haslams, and no disrespect to them, although maybe I'm disrespecting them a little bit here, but it's good when they're not heard from, when you don't have them in front of the mics talking. So, and I say that about any team. I would much prefer my owner be in the background and let my general manager and coach do the talking. And that's what we got at the combine. That's what we've gotten during free agency and the trading period, and then also the draft. So that's encouraging. Certainly Berry seems like he's on the ball.
Yep.
Seems like he doesn't seem like anything's phasing him. You don't want to grade a draft because none of these guys has played down in the NFL. But if you look at the offseason and you look at, again, what Cowherd was doing, the back of the football cards for Hooper and Conklin, for example, even Joseph, you want to throw him in there.
I forgot about Joseph. Yeah, that's right. That's a good. I'm glad you brought him up, because whether that's a 1-year deal or not, that's a good pickup for them on the backside of the defense.
Solid contributor, yeah, and so, and then you project some of the high picks, specifically Wills and Delpit. You start to say, okay, this looks really good for Cleveland. I agree with you on the linebacker front. All I would say to that, if I'm an optimist regarding the Browns, is I don't think Goodson was brought in here to be a hood ornament. I think he's part of the mix. He's certainly part of the rotation at linebacker. And I also think they believe in Mac Wilson. I'm just guessing that one, even more so than Taki. I believe they think Mac Wilson is a legitimate NFL player. I don't know what his ceiling is, but I think they're excited about him. So, that still leaves something to be desired at the linebacker position, but I don't know that maybe the cupboard is as bare as we would think if we sat down and, before we talked to a Berry or a Stefanski or any of the guys on the defensive side. I've got to believe they also think that a full year of Miles, an unsuspended Myles Garrett is can only help the second and third levels of the defense. They also potentially still have a couple of tricks up their sleeve. They have, I believe, the most cap space still of any team, at this moment. So, and Clowney is out there as one example. So it wouldn't
pass.
surprise me at all. What's that?
I'll pass on
What's that,
Clowney.
RoadMan?
I'll pass on Clowney.
Well,
It's
okay.
either Olivier Vernon or Clowney. It's not going to be both. So I give me Olivier Vernon for another year over Clowney, who I think is a major underachiever.
Okay. Entirely possible that they pass on him too, and maybe they would have had something done with him by now if they were that high on him. But
D-Man, unless he brings his price down to their price, I'm not paying him what he wants. If
he's
they
already
offer, and if they offer him, their price and he accepts that, fine, okay, add him into the rotation. But I'm not paying the 17, 18, 19, 20 million, whatever he's been asking.
Well, he's already found that there are no takers at that number, reportedly. The numbers come way down since he made, or since the supposed demand was made public that he wanted anywhere from 18 to 20 a year. So we'll see. But even if it's not Clowney, maybe they have somebody else that we're unaware of right now who they're going to bring in. But even if they didn't do anything, and they were going to start training camp, and I'm skipping over OTAs because of COVID, but virtual OTAs, whatever it is, whenever they start for real, even if this were it, I still really like what the Browns have done in the offseason. They've improved in a lot of areas. I don't think it's realistic to expect to improve everything in one offseason. So all things considered, I would like to think the Browns did a heck of a job. And, I think their fans can rest assured that there is competency at the top of this paradigm, that it's not a bunch of guys, crunching numbers and that's it. And they're not relying. I would like to think, as I said, that they relied on Joe Thomas, among others, for their input on Jedrick Wills. So I don't think it's just a bunch of guys sitting in front of a computer and saying, okay, we're going to take whatever the computer says is the highest rated guy.
D-Man, they're a better football team now than they were when the season ended, okay? And that's with the addition of the players, and that's addition by subtraction. Whoop-de-hell's gone, and anybody is better than him. And Kevin Stefanski, even though he's a first-year coach, and even if he calls his own plays, I think is a step up over Freddie Kitchens.
Yeah, that's a great point you make. The Browns would say privately the biggest upgrade they made in the offseason was the one that was made when they sent Freddie packing. I don't think they would be as unkind to John Dorsey, but getting rid of Dorsey paved the way for what appears to be a very clear line of communication from Barry to Depot to Stefanski. It doesn't seem like there's any infighting or questioning of each other going on behind the scenes. I think we would have known about that by now if that were the case. So getting rid of Dorsey, while I don't think was a preferred outcome, it was something that needed to be done in order for these guys to feel unencumbered and to feel like they could talk freely amongst themselves and not worry about being second guessed. So I can't wait to see what happens with this team. It's obviously a very difficult division.
And I was going to say that right there. I mean, we got to look real quick.
In a vacuum.
Yeah, real quick. We got to look. I mean, the Ravens they were picking 28th, the Baltimore Ravens. And they got Patrick Queen, J.K. Dobbins, Justin Matabuki, and Devin Devaney, a wide receiver who they really – and then Malik Harrison, with their first 5 picks. The Cincinnati Bengals, they got the greatest quarterback, single-season greatest quarterback in the history of college football. The one team, one heartbeat. Go Tigers, Joe Burrow. So, they've got the young gunslinger down there now in Cincinnati, and they picked up T. Higgins in the second round for him to throw to, along with A.J. Green and Logan Wilson, the linebacker who I was thinking maybe the Browns would go after out of Wyoming. So I thought the Ravens had an A-, B+ draft. I thought the Bengals had an A draft. I thought the Steelers had a B- C+ draft. They didn't have a first-round pick, but they're saying That was Minka Fitzpatrick, who they got in a trade last year. But of all the teams in the division, I'd probably say Bengals had the best draft, Browns second, Ravens third, and Steelers fourth.
Yeah, and the Ravens will say, look, you got to knock us off. We're the two-time defending AFC North champion, and we got appreciably better. So, you're going to have to catch us. And I don't think we've heard the last of the Steelers if Roethlisberger returns to form.
It's a big if.
If he doesn't, I think Winston, although Winston I was hearing was close to with the Saints maybe as a backup, but to me, if I were Winston or Newton, I would keep my options open and keep an eye on Pittsburgh. If Roethlisberger is a no-go, I'm like, hey, sign me up because I know I could come in there and produce. But we'll see how that goes. But if Roethlisberger returns, they still have some pieces. So you wish the Browns could play in a vacuum, but they can't. They play in a very difficult division. And, of course, they play in a conference that features, Patrick Mahomes, the reigning MVP, the MVP 2 years ago. And then, of course, Lamar Jackson, the MVP this past year, is in their own division. But the Chiefs are the Super Bowl champs defending. They're in the AFC. It's a loaded conference, no question about it. But you can't worry about that right now. What you just worry about is, okay, did the Browns get better? Yes, they did. All right, RoadMan, thank you for the time, and we really appreciate it. And again, best wishes and thoughts for Cameron as he's in Brazil. We hope everything works out fine for him down there.
Always a pleasure, D-Man. Keep up the great work. Chase Smith, too. Fabulous job as always, and we'll do this again soon, all right?
Thanks, RoadMan.
All right, see you guys.
See you.
Go Tigers.